The boutique glittered with light from crystal chandeliers, their reflections dancing across the polished marble floor. Dresses shimmered on their stands like museum pieces, each one with a price tag that could rival a family car. I sat quietly on a velvet chair near the corner, the hum of soft classical music brushing the air. At 68, I had been in rooms like this before, but never as a guest of honor. Today, I was simply the invisible mother-in-law watching. Clarice twirled in front of the mirror, her laughter sharp and theatrical, as the saleswoman adjusted the straps of a gown heavy with crystals. Damon clapped politely, though I could see his shoulders stiffen under the weight of his fiancée's performance. The room buzzed with admiration, cousins snapping pictures, Clarice's mother wiping away a performative tear. And me. I held my daughter-in-law's purse, her phone, and a delicate veil she had demanded I fetch from the far rack. I also held something else folded tightly in my pocket, the receipt. Not just a random slip of paper, but proof that 3 weeks ago I had already paid in full for that very gown. She didn't know. No one knew. I had wired the boutique an advance under the guise of a family sponsor because Clarice had insisted to everyone that she wanted the grandest wedding Chicago had ever seen. Damon couldn't afford it, and her parents only smiled and nodded as if money appeared out of thin air. So I had quietly stepped in, remembering the promise I once whispered to my late husband. I'll make sure Damon has everything he needs. Veil Clarice snapped her hand outstretched like a queen to a servant. I swallowed my pride and handed it over. The slap came before I could steady myself. A sharp crack echoed louder than the music. My cheek burned, my head jerked, and the room froze. Clarice's voice slithered through the stunned silence. Leave. You're ruining my moment. Gasps followed. One cousin whispered. Another pretended to fumble with her phone. Damon stood, frozen color draining from his face, but he didn't move. Clarice's palm still hovered in the air, her smile fixed, as if nothing had happened. I pressed my lips together, the sting not nearly as harsh as the humiliation. My heart pounded, but I would not give her the satisfaction of tears. I straightened my shoulders, adjusted the strap of my handbag, and walked toward the door. But even as I crossed that glittering floor, my fingers brushed the folded receipt in my pocket. Paid. Paid by me. The dress draped over Clarice's body, the one she flaunted as proof of her taste and charm, existed only because I had covered its cost. And now she dared slap me, dismiss me, command me to leave as if I were nothing. I stepped into the cool Chicago air, the heavy boutique door closing behind me. My cheek still tingled, but my mind sharpened with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Clarice believed she was untouchable, that her performance of wealth and beauty could carry her through. She had no idea the ground she strutted on was nothing more than the credit of an old woman she disdained. Standing on the sidewalk, I inhaled deeply, steadying myself as the traffic roared past. The slap hadn't broken me, it had awakened me. The time for silence was over. Because what Clarice didn't realize, what no one in that boutique realized, was that I had been the quiet benefactor all along. And if I chose with one simple act, I could make her entire fairy tale collapse. The thought gave me more strength than her hand had ever tried to take away. And as I turned the corner, I knew exactly what I would do next. Walking away from that boutique, I realized the slap wasn't the first wound Clarice had given me. It was simply the loudest. The smaller cuts had been happening for months, quiet and unseen, each one carved into me every time I signed my name on a check meant for her wedding. I still remember the first time I opened my checkbook for her. It was a sunny morning in February, the kitchen smelling faintly of Damon's favorite coffee. He had brought Clarice over to talk about venues, and she spoke with such confidence it startled me. She had circled pictures in glossy magazines, ballrooms with marble floors, staircases sweeping like something out of a movie, chandeliers that dripped light. She turned to Damon with a wide smile and said, "We'll book the country club, obviously. Nothing else is worthy of us." Damon's face fell for just a second, but he caught himself and laughed weakly. Clarice didn't notice, or maybe she didn't care. I knew his salary. I knew his student loans. I also knew my son's pride, the kind that would rather drown quietly than admit he was sinking. That night, I pulled out my late husband's fountain pen, the one he had used to sign the deed on our house, and wrote the deposit check myself. The club never questioned where the funds came from. Clarice only squealed and said she had persuaded them to hold the date. And so it began. The caterer came next, a French company that charged more for hors d'oeuvres than most families spent on rent. The florist followed, demanding deposits for imported orchids that would arrive fresh on the wedding morning. The photographer required an upfront retainer. Each time Damon and Clarice smiled, and I quietly slipped away to cover the bill. No one asked me to. No one even thanked me. But I remembered the last night I sat beside my husband's hospital bed. His hand was weak, his voice almost gone, but his eyes were clear when he whispered, "Promise me you'll always protect Damon's happiness." Those words had rooted themselves in my chest like an iron law. Protecting Damon had meant keeping the peace, and keeping the peace had meant silence. At first, I told myself it was temporary. Perhaps Clarice's parents would contribute later. Perhaps Damon would surprise me with a savings account. Perhaps, though this was the faintest hope, Clarice would soften enough to acknowledge what I had done. But weeks stretched into months, and still every invoice landed in my mailbox, not theirs. When relatives asked about the grandeur of the upcoming wedding, I smiled and said nothing. When neighbors commented on how generous Damon's future in-laws must be, I simply nodded. My silence protected not only Damon but also the fragile image Clarice wanted to project. To question it would have been to admit that my son's bride was building castles with another woman's stones. But the burden grew heavier with each check. My retirement savings shrank. The fund I had set aside for medical emergencies dwindled. I told myself it was worth it, that Damon's happiness would justify the sacrifice. Yet standing outside that boutique with my cheek still warm from Clarice's slap, I felt the weight of all those months pressing down on me. I had carried her dreams on my back, quietly, faithfully, almost foolishly. And she had struck me as if I were nothing more than her servant. That moment shifted something inside me. The promise I made to my husband had never been to protect Damon's illusions. It had been to protect his happiness, and happiness built on lies and arrogance was no happiness at all. My fingers brushed the edge of my purse where my phone rested, and a new thought entered my mind, sharp and clean as glass. I didn't have to keep carrying this burden. By the time I reached the corner of Michigan Avenue, I knew what my next step would be. I paused on the sidewalk, the rush of Chicago traffic pulsing around me, and pulled my phone from my purse. My cheek still burned, but my hands were steady now. With a few swipes, I opened my banking app, found the account tied to the platinum card Clarice had been waving around for months, and pressed cancel. A small chime confirmed it. Just like that. The river of money she thought endless had dried up. For a moment, I simply breathed. The spring air was sharp, the weight on my chest a little lighter. Behind me, laughter drifted through the glass, Clarice's shrill voice cutting above it all. I turned slightly, just enough to see through the boutique window without being noticed. She stood at the counter, still holding the glittering gown against her chest. The saleswoman ran the card with practiced ease, then a frown. She tried again. Clarice's smile faltered. From where I stood, I could almost hear her words. "Run it again. There's plenty of money on that card." Another swipe. Another decline. The saleswoman's polite tone grew firmer. Clarice's face flushed crimson, her eyes darting toward the crowd of relatives and store staff who had gathered like spectators at a play. "That's impossible," she snapped, slamming the card on the counter. "Do it again." The manager appeared tall and stern arms folded. "Miss, our system has declined the payment. We will need to hold the gown until funds are verified. We have other clients waiting." The gown, her crown, was gently tugged from her arms. She clung for a moment, then let go, her fingers trembling with rage. The sequins caught the light one last time before disappearing behind the counter. I couldn't hear the gasps, but I saw them ripple through the room. Cousins exchanged wide-eyed glances. Even Damon stepped forward as if to intervene, only to be brushed aside by Clarice's fury. She turned on him, shouting words. I couldn't catch her arms, flailing her voice sharp enough to cut glass. My phone buzzed in my hand. A notification appeared across the screen. Transaction declined. $18,500 bridal luxe. My lips curved into the smallest smile. Inside, Clarice's mask had slipped. She was no longer the glittering bride-to-be commanding attention, but a child caught without her allowance. She stomped her heel against the floor, pointing at the saleswoman, then at Damon, then toward the door where I had just been banished. Her mouth moved fast, accusing, desperate. The staff remained unmoved. The manager crossed his arms tighter, signaling an end to the charade. One by one, relatives shifted uncomfortably, whispering into their phones, some edging toward the exit. The fairy tale was already unraveling thread by thread. I watched as Clarice's mother rushed to her side, trying to soothe her with frantic gestures. Damon stood rooted, his jaw tight, his hands hanging helpless at his sides. His eyes flicked once to the window, meeting mine through the glass. For a heartbeat, we held the look. He knew something had changed, though he didn't yet know what. I stepped back from the window, the reflection of passing cars swallowing my face. Whatever happened inside that boutique was no longer mine to shield or smooth over. For months, I had been the invisible foundation beneath Clarice's castle. With one press of a button, I had pulled the ground out from under her feet. The crown she wore so proudly had been stripped before her audience, and I hadn't needed to say a single word. As I turned down the street, the phone in my hand vibrated again, this time with an incoming call from Damon. Damon's name lit up my screen as I walked the ringtone sharp against the thrum of traffic. I let it buzz until it faded. Almost immediately, Clarice's name appeared, then vanished, then came again. Within minutes, my phone was a carousel of demands. My son, my daughter-in-law, even my own sister, who must have been texted from inside the boutique. I stopped at a bench near the river, sat down, and finally answered. Damon's voice burst through first. "Mother, what on earth did you do?" The card declined. "Clarice is humiliated. They're saying you stormed out. Why would you leave like that?" I drew in a slow breath, keeping my tone even. "Because I was dismissed, Damon. Slapped and told to leave. You saw it." That was a misunderstanding. He rushed the way a man rushes to put out a fire with his bare hands. "She's under stress. You should know better than to provoke her at a time like this." "Provoke her?" My laugh came low and bitter. By handing her a veil, by carrying her purse like a servant, before he could answer another call, forced its way in. I switched lines without hesitation. Clarice's voice screeched through high-pitched and venomous. "You jealous old woman? You've hated me since the day Damon brought me home. Admit it. You couldn't stand to see me shine, so you sabotaged me. Well, congratulations. Everyone saw what you did." I pinched the bridge of my nose, listening to her tirade rattle on. The words rolled like hail against a window, loud, sharp, meaningless. Finally, I cut in. "Clarice, do you really think this is about jealousy? Do you think I care about a sequined gown and an audience clapping for you?" "Yes," she spat. "You can't stand that Damon chose me. You're pathetic, Evelina. You ruined everything." My voice dropped colder than the wind off the river. "No, Clarice. I didn't ruin anything. I simply stopped paying." The silence on the line was instant and deafening. What she hissed. "It was my card," I said, each word deliberate. "Every deposit, every reservation, every imported flower and overpriced canapé. Mine. You strutted around on my dime, and today I decided the show was over." Her shriek was so loud, I pulled the phone away. "Liar, Damon." "She's lying," she cried, her voice muffled as she must have shoved the phone toward my son. For a brief second, Damon's voice returned, lower, uncertain. "Mother, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I answered that I have the receipts. The venue, the florist, the caterer, all in my name, all paid from my account. I did it to protect you, Damon, to honor a promise your father asked of me. But no more. Not after today." On the other end, a chorus of voices rose, Clarice raging, Damon stumbling for words, my sister scolding that I had embarrassed the family. I listened for a beat, then pressed the red button and let the noise die. The city moved on around me, cars rushing, strangers laughing, life indifferent to my family's unraveling. For the first time in months, I felt the power shift back into my hands. The truth was loose, now sharp as broken glass, and soon it would cut deeper than any slap ever could. My phone buzzed again, the screen flashing with my sister's name, but I didn't hesitate this time. I answered, bracing myself for the storm to come. By evening, the pounding on my front door shook the walls of my quiet home. I had barely finished setting down a cup of tea when Damon's voice thundered through the wood. "Mother, open up. Now." I hesitated, then unlocked it. He strode in his face, red. His tie loosened the weight of a man caught in two storms pressing on his shoulders. "How could you do this?" he demanded, slamming the door behind him. Clarice was humiliated. "The boutique staff, our relatives, half the family chat. It's everywhere already. You've embarrassed us all." I folded my arms, steadying my voice. "I embarrassed no one, Damon. I stopped being your bank." His mouth opened, but no words came at first. He blinked at me as if I'd spoken a foreign language. "Bank. You're saying you've been paying all this time. That card was yours." "Yes," I said simply. "Every bill, every reservation, every check. You thought miracles paid for a country club and orchids flown in from Ecuador." He rubbed his forehead, pacing across my rug. "Why? Why would you do that if you were just going to pull the rug out from under us?" I stared at him, my chest tightening at the word us. "Because I wanted to protect you. Because I made a promise to your father that I'd look after your happiness. But happiness, Damon, doesn't grow from lies. And today, Clarice slapped me like a servant in front of half the family. Do you expect me to keep funding her cruelty?" His shoulders sagged, the fight in him dimming, but not gone. "You should have told me. You should have said something before letting it all explode like this. Now she's saying you did it to sabotage her, to make her look bad. Do you know how that feels for me? I'm in the middle of this war, Mother, and I'm drowning. I softened for a moment, seeing the boy he once was, the boy who clung to my skirt when thunder shook the house. You're not in the middle, Damon. You've chosen a side every day you stayed silent while she belittled me. You let her treat me like baggage because you were too afraid to confront her. Don't tell me you're drowning when you never even reached for the rope I've been holding. He stopped pacing, staring at me with eyes darkened by conflict. I love her, he whispered, almost to himself. And I love you, I answered. But love doesn't excuse disrespect. She used my money, my silence, my sacrifice, and still struck me down as if I were dirt beneath her shoes. That's not stress. That's character. The room went quiet, except for the clock ticking above the mantel. Damon's hands trembled at his sides. He looked torn in two between the mother who raised him and the woman he'd promised to marry. Finally, he turned away, his voice low. You've set something in motion I can't stop. She's furious. She says the wedding is in jeopardy. She says you'll regret this. I already regret it, I said, my voice sharp. I regret giving her my silence for so long. He looked back at me, searching for something, mercy perhaps, or a path that would let him keep us both. But my face gave him nothing but truth. Without another word, he pulled open the door and stepped into the night, leaving it half closed behind him. The tea on the counter had gone cold, but I sat down anyway, staring at the empty chair across from me. For the first time in years, the house felt both quiet and heavy, a silence that pressed like stone. And deep in that silence, my phone buzzed again, this time with a message from the wedding venue. The message from the venue still sat unread on my phone when another notification blinked across the screen. Then another, then a dozen more. By the time I opened the group chat, the screen was flooded with texts from cousins, nieces, nephews, and a few relatives I hadn't seen in years. Did anyone else see what happened at Bridal Luxe? Clarice's card bounced 3 times? Someone said Aunt Evelina canceled it on purpose. Is that true? I set my cold tea aside and scrolled my thumb, moving slowly as the words multiplied. Why would she do that? Wait, wasn't she paying for the wedding all along? Clarice swore her parents were covering everything. This doesn't add up. My heart thudded once heavy, but I stayed silent. It was strange seeing my private sacrifices dissected in a digital courtroom of relatives. Each message carried a note of curiosity, suspicion, or thinly veiled judgment. I heard she slapped Evelina. What at her age? That's disgusting. Clarice is dramatic, but she wouldn't. Would she? I took a slow sip of fresh tea, letting the warmth settle me. The words blurred slightly on the screen, not from tears, but from the fatigue of carrying secrets for too long. A new message appeared this time, from my sister Margaret, who had been inside the boutique. It's true. Clarice hit her. I saw it. Then Evelina walked out like a queen. Honestly, good for her. That one lit a spark in the chat. Wait, so Evelina was paying. Clarice lied to everyone. If she slapped her Emil, who funded everything, that's beyond shameless. Another cousin chimed in. I always wondered how Damon could afford that venue. His job isn't bad, but it's not that good. A nephew added laughing emojis, followed by, this is going to be the wedding of the year, if it even happens. The chat spiraled into gossip, half defense, half condemnation. Some defended Clarice. Weddings are stressful. Maybe she snapped. Others didn't hold back. If Evelina really paid, Clarice should be groveling instead of screaming. Through it all, I remained a silent observer, my teacup balanced carefully in my hand. It struck me how quickly loyalty shifted when whispers began. Blood ties thinned against the weight of spectacle. The slap had been a spark, and now the fire spread across the family like dry grass. I could almost hear Clarice fuming, her fingers flying over her own phone somewhere across the city, trying to spin the story back into her favor. But once doubt seeped in, it never truly left. Already I saw the questions forming: who really held the purse strings, and who was the liar? I set my phone face down on the table, unwilling to keep watching the circus. For months I had been their invisible benefactor, carrying the burden alone. Now, for the first time, the truth was slipping out without me saying a word. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent months protecting Damon and Clarice from shame, and now shame bloomed on its own, watered by their arrogance. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the quiet tick of the kitchen clock. The group chat continued buzzing, lighting up the darkened screen beside me. I didn't need to answer. The family would write their own story now, and Clarice's perfect image was already cracking. But I knew this was only the beginning, because the next notification wouldn't come from gossiping cousins. It would come from the vendors demanding money. The buzzing of my phone had become background noise by the next morning. Notifications, calls, whispers, they all blended into a steady hum I no longer cared to answer. I thought I had braced myself for every consequence of canceling that card. But then came the envelope. It arrived with the regular mail tucked between a grocery flyer and a water bill. Plain white, no return address. My name wasn't on it, Damon's was. I almost tossed it aside to leave for him later, but something about the embossed seal in the corner caught my eye. I slid it open with a butter knife, my heart uneasy, even before I read the first line. Notice of late payment. Personal loan. I read it twice then, a third time, my stomach dropping lower with each word. Damon had no loans beyond his student debt, and I had helped him set those on autopay years ago. This was different. This was fresh, recent, and in his name. I shuffled through the rest of the papers. Loan amount $15,000. Cosigner none. Purpose unspecified. The signature at the bottom was unmistakably Damon's, but shakier, sloppier, almost as though someone had tried too hard to mimic his hand. I gripped the edge of the table, the kettle whistling on the stove behind me. Clarice's voice echoed in my memory, shrill and accusing. You're jealous. You ruined everything. My pulse quickened. I thought the canceled card would be the end of it, but this was something far uglier. When Damon came by that evening, I waited until he sat down before sliding the letter across the table. Explain this. He blinked at the paper, his brow furrowing. What is it? You tell me. His eyes skimmed the page, and I watched the color drain from his face. I don't know anything about this. I never signed for a loan. Then why does your name sit on this contract? He stammered, his fingers running through his hair. I swear, Mother, I didn't. Then his voice trailed off, his gaze shifting to the floor. Clarice handles most of the paperwork these days. She said she was consolidating bills, making things easier. I felt a cold chill crawl up my spine. She forged this. He shook his head as though refusing to believe it, but his silence was louder than any denial. How many more, Damon? My voice cracked, despite my effort to keep it steady. How many more debts in your name, stacking like bricks, while she parades around in crystal gowns? I don't know, he whispered. I trusted her. Trust. The word felt like ash in my mouth. I had trusted, too trusted, that my silence would shield him, trusted that Clarice's lies would crumble only under their own weight. But this was theft with interest, a betrayal inked on paper and stamped by a bank. I reached across the table, placing my hand over his trembling one. Listen to me. This isn't just about a wedding anymore. She's tying stones around your ankles and smiling while you sink. If you don't open your eyes now, there won't be anything left to save. He lifted his gaze to me, torn and weary, the boy in him, still searching for someone to fix what he couldn't face. I pulled my hand back, folding the papers into an envelope again. I'll keep this safe. But Damon, you need to decide whether you want a wife or a warden. The clock ticked in the silence that followed each second, dragging like a warning. Later that night, when the house was quiet, I slipped the envelope into my desk drawer, locking it shut. My heart told me this was only the first crack in a wall of lies waiting to tumble down. And by morning, the wall would shake harder because the florist was calling next. The florist's call came early, their polite voice tightening as they explained the check for Clarice's grand order had bounced. Imported orchids, cascading roses, lilies flown in from California, all of it now suspended unless another payment arrived. I listened, quietly apologized, and assured them they'd get an answer soon. When I hung up, my hands were shaking, not from anger, but from exhaustion. That afternoon, Damon appeared at my door again, looking older than his 34 years. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie shoved into his pocket, and his eyes had the dull, restless glaze of a man who hadn't slept. We sat at the kitchen table, a silence stretching between us, broken only when he muttered, "I knew you know. Not everything, but enough." I frowned, knew what that her spending didn't make sense. The handbags, the spa weekends, the deposits she bragged about paying, I knew my salary couldn't cover it. I told myself her parents were helping, or that she had savings she never mentioned. I wanted to believe her. His fingers drummed against the wood, restless, guilty. If I questioned her, it meant admitting I wasn't enough for her. So I let myself be blind. I leaned forward, my voice quiet but firm. Love without honesty is just debt, Damon. It collects interest until one day it drowns you. He flinched as though the words had struck him. You think I don't know that now? I'm watching everything collapse, the venue, the florist, even the photographer called to say the balance was overdue. Every time the phone rings, I wonder which lie will be next. He buried his face in his hands. But I can't let her go. Not like this. I promised her a life, and I don't know how to untangle myself from the mess she's made. I wanted to reach for him, to fold him into the embrace I used to give when nightmares woke him as a boy. But he wasn't that boy anymore. He was a man, and the chains he wore were ones he'd clasped himself. Damon, I said, steadying my tone, you didn't promise her lies. You promised her love. If she twisted that into a license to steal, that's not on you. His eyes lifted, red-rimmed and raw. You don't understand. I need her. She makes me feel like I'm more than just some man punching numbers into a spreadsheet. She believes in me even when she uses me. I shook my head slowly. She doesn't believe in you, Damon. She believes in what she can take from you, and she's taken everything I had to give as well. He pushed back from the table, standing so abruptly his chair scraped against the floor. So, what mother? You want me to walk away, to cancel the wedding, and admit to everyone that I was a fool, that the woman I defended humiliated you and lied to me. You think I can survive that kind of shame? The pain in his voice cut deep, but my resolve didn't waver. Shame fades. Damon, debt doesn't, and neither does betrayal. For a long moment we stood in silence, mother and son, staring across a gulf that felt wider than the kitchen between us. His chest rose and fell in heavy breaths. his fists clenched as though he wanted to fight the truth itself. Finally, he turned toward the door, his voice ragged. I need time. Just time. When the door shut behind him, the house felt emptier than it ever had. I sank into the chair he'd abandoned, staring at the envelope in my drawer that held the proof of Clarice's forgery. And as the evening light faded, my phone began to ring again, this time from the country club itself. The country club manager's voice on the phone was brisk but polite, the tone of a man used to ending fantasies. Mrs. Harrow, unless the remaining balance is settled by Friday, will have no choice but to release the date. We've already held it longer than policy allows. I told him the truth in as few words as possible. You'll need to call Clarice. There was a pause, then a clipped acknowledgement before he hung up. I almost pitied her. Almost. By the weekend, pity was unnecessary. She had managed to corner herself. Word came quickly that both the florist and the venue had pressed her for payment, each one armed with contracts bearing my name. Clarice stormed into my home, uninvited, Damon trailing behind her. His expression caught between shame and fury. She slammed a stack of papers on my kitchen counter, her manicured nails tapping them as if the sound alone could intimidate me. Explain this, she demanded. I lifted the top sheet and smiled without warmth. Receipts. My receipts. Damon leaned over, scanning the pages. His lips moved as he read the checks, the account numbers, my signature. He turned slowly toward her. Clarice. She's not lying. These are real. Her face paled, but she fought back, her voice trembling with rage. So what if she helped? That doesn't give her the right to humiliate me. She should have stayed quiet and let us handle it. Handle it! Damon snapped louder than I'd heard him in years. You said your parents were paying. You said everything was taken care of. And all this time, it was my mother draining herself to fund your fantasy. Clarice's eyes welled with tears, but I had seen this performance before, the trembling lip, the quiver in her voice. I was going to pay her back, she insisted. After the wedding, once everything settled. You don't understand, Damon. The image, the expectations. I couldn't let anyone think we were ordinary. He shoved the papers back toward her. You forged a loan in my name. Did you plan to pay that back too? Her head whipped toward him, eyes wide with panic. Who told you that I found the notice? I said. Calmly, my gaze steady on her. You underestimated the man you tried to fool. Damon may have wanted to believe you, but he's not blind anymore. Clarice's composure cracked then. She sank onto a chair, her face buried in her hands, sobbing into her manicured palms. I just wanted it to be perfect, she cried. I wanted the kind of wedding people envy. Is that so wrong? Damon's shoulders slumped, his anger slipping into exhaustion. Wanting beauty isn't wrong, he said, his voice hollow. But lying, stealing, and humiliating the person who made it possible, that's not love, Clarice. That's greed. Her sobs grew louder, but they didn't move him. I watched him from across the room, the weight of realization finally pressing down on him. He had defended her for so long, but the cracks were spreading too fast now. For once, I didn't intervene. I simply folded the receipts back into their envelope and tucked them under my arm. Damon's eyes followed the motion, then drifted back to his fiancée, who still wept as though her tears could glue the shattered pieces together. When he finally spoke, it was barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can marry you. The words hung in the kitchen, heavier than the silence that followed. Clarice froze, her sobs cutting off as if someone had turned a dial. She stared at him in disbelief, but Damon couldn't meet her gaze. His eyes slid to the floor, then to me, filled with a grief deeper than anger. I said nothing. Some truths didn't need my voice to echo them. That night, after they left the house, felt colder than before. I washed my teacup, dried it carefully, and placed it back on the shelf. And when I returned to the living room, my phone was already buzzing with a new storm this time, from the relatives who had heard whispers of a canceled wedding. The morning of the wedding dawned gray, the kind of sky that seemed to know storms were coming even if the air stayed dry. I hadn't planned to go. I told myself it wasn't my place anymore. But as the hours crept on, curiosity and duty tugged at me until I found myself driving toward the country club, my dress plain and my heart heavy. The parking lot was half full when I arrived. Relatives stood outside in clusters, whispering their formal clothes out of place against the anxious lines on their faces. I passed them quietly, offering no smile, no explanation, just a nod. Inside, the first sight stole the breath from my lungs. The grand ballroom, which weeks ago had been promised as a palace of flowers and chandeliers, stood bare. Long tables sat uncovered chairs stacked along the walls. The stage where musicians were meant to play was empty, the sound system dead. Not a single server bustled through the room. Only silence and confusion filled the space. Guests murmured as they wandered in, checking their invitations as if the address might have been a mistake. Some looked at their watches. Others whispered into phones. A child tugged at her mother's sleeve and asked why there weren't any balloons. At the center of the chaos was Clarice. Her gown was not the glittering crystal creation she had flaunted in the boutique weeks before. Instead, she wore a plain white rental, the fabric wrinkled and stiff. Her makeup, heavy and smudged, couldn't hide the red around her eyes. She stormed across the room, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Where are the staff? Where's the florist? Why isn't anything set up?" Her mother trailed after her, whispering frantic reassurances that sounded more like pleas. Damon followed a few steps behind, silent, his face ashen, his tie already loosened, as if he couldn't bear the formality of the day. I stood near the doorway unnoticed at first, and watched as Clarice lashed out at anyone within reach. She cornered the manager, demanding answers, her voice shrill enough to draw stares. We had a contract. Everything was confirmed. You can't just leave us like this. The manager's response was calm, professional, and devastating. Miss Vaughn. The balance was not paid. We held the reservation as long as policy allowed. Without payment, we cannot proceed. Clarice's jaw dropped. For a moment, she looked like a queen stripped of her crown in front of her court. She turned to Damon, grabbing his arm. Tell him it's a mistake. Call the bank. Fix it. But Damon didn't move. His eyes flicked to me across the room, catching my presence for the first time. His expression was unreadable. Grief, shame, perhaps a plea for strength. Clarice followed his gaze and saw me. Her face twisted fury overtaking desperation. She marched across the ballroom, her gown swishing angrily, her heels clacking against the bare floor. When she stopped before me, her voice was venom. This is your fault. You did this to me. I met her glare without flinching. Around us, the murmurs of guests quieted, waiting for a confrontation. But I said nothing. Silence was my answer, and it echoed louder than any words could have. Her fists clenched, her face blotched red, but she couldn't withstand the weight of that silence. She spun on her heel, storming back toward Damon, who still stood rooted, a man watching the ruins of the life he had been too afraid to question. And in that moment, the room seemed to understand what words had not yet revealed. Clarice's empire was nothing more than a house of cards, and it had already fallen. I turned away, stepping toward the window, where the gray sky pressed low against the glass, and braced myself for what the family would demand of me next. The ballroom had grown restless. Guests fanned themselves with folded programs, whispers darting like birds between tables. Some were already slipping out the doors, muttering about wasted travel and broken promises. Others lingered, their eyes darting between Clarice's fury and Damon's silence. I stood still, letting the noise swell, until finally, someone called out from the back, my cousin Ellen, sharp as ever. "What happened here? Who's paying for all this, or not paying as it seems?" Clarice whirled toward her, her voice trembling with rage. "It's a mistake, that's all. The club will fix it. We'll have the wedding." "No." My voice cut clean through the chaos. It surprised even me how steady it sounded. The murmurs died instantly as dozens of eyes turned to me. I walked to the center of the room, my steps deliberate, my hands clasped in front of me. "Every check came from me," I said. "The venue, the flowers, the caterer, the dress, all of it." And I stopped. Gasps rippled through the hall like a sudden wind. Clarice's painted face went pale, her mouth opening and closing with no sound. Damon's shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed on the floor. I let the silence stretch a moment before continuing. "Clarice led you all to believe her parents were funding this grand display. She let you believe Damon had the means to provide it. The truth is simpler. For months I drained my savings to protect my son from shame. I kept quiet to keep the peace. But peace built on lies is no peace at all." The room buzzed again, this time sharper, angrier. Some shook their heads, muttering, "Unbelievable." Others looked at Clarice with open disgust. A few cast pitying glances toward Damon. Clarice finally found her voice shrill and broken. "She's lying. She's jealous of me, always has been." She, but her words faltered when I pulled a folded envelope from my purse and held it up. Receipts, contracts, bank statements. In my name. "If anyone doubts me, you're welcome to see." The last of her protests collapsed under the weight of paper. Her knees bent slightly, as though the ground beneath her had shifted. She reached for Damon's arm, but he didn't move to steady her. No one rushed to defend her. Not her mother, not Damon, not the friends who had spent months praising her brilliance. They all stood in silence, the kind of silence that exposes truth more ruthlessly than any argument. I slipped the envelope back into my purse and took a step toward the exit. Behind me, the whispers grew into a tide of condemnation. Ahead of me, the heavy doors opened to the gray afternoon light. And as I crossed the threshold, I knew the shame I had carried alone was no longer mine to bear. It belonged to her now, and there was no hiding from it. The parking lot outside buzzed with voices already relaying the scene inside, and I braced myself for the storm that would surely follow me home. I hadn't been home more than an hour before the pounding started again. This time it was Clarice. She stormed into my living room without waiting for an invitation. Her gown wrinkled, her hair pinned unevenly, as though she'd torn at it in frustration. Damon hovered in the doorway, his face tight with shame. But he didn't stop her. "You ruined me," she shouted, her voice cracking. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The guests are laughing. My friends are leaving in disgust. Jacob's family won't even speak to me." "You did that to yourself," I interrupted calmly. Her eyes flared wide, wet with anger. "No. You've been jealous from the start. Jealous of my youth, jealous of Damon's love, jealous that you can't stand aside and let me be the center for once." I rose slowly from my chair, my back straight, my voice firm. Clarice respect was the only payment I ever asked for. and I never received it. She flinched, but only for a moment before lashing out again. You think respect pays for orchids? For champagne? For the photographer? No, it takes money. And you had it. You could have given it. But you chose to humiliate me instead. I gave more than money. I said sharper now. I gave silence. I gave patience. I gave my dignity in that boutique while you slapped me in front of strangers. I gave months of my life covering bills you lied about. And still, you treated me as less than nothing. That ends now. Her lips trembled, but she pressed forward. If you don't fix this, Damon will hate you. You'll lose your son forever. Behind her, Damon stirred as if to protest, but my gaze silenced him. I turned back to her. I'd rather lose him to truth than keep him by feeding lies. She faltered, then her breath hitching. For the first time, the mask slipped completely. The proud bride-to-be looked small, cornered, desperate. I just wanted the wedding I dreamed of, she whispered. I wanted to be admired, to be someone. You could have had admiration, I said softly, though my tone carried no pity. But you chose deceit, and admiration built on deceit doesn't last. Her tears spilled, then streaking her heavy makeup. She reached for Damon's hand, but he didn't take it. He stood frozen, torn between us, his silence louder than her sobs. Finally, she turned away, her sobs echoing through the hallway as she fled the house. The door slammed behind her, rattling the windows. Damon remained at the threshold, his shoulders sagging, his head bowed. He didn't look at me, didn't speak, only lingered in the heavy quiet. I sank back into my chair, the room thick with the weight of everything unspoken. For the first time, I felt the cost of every dollar, every sacrifice, every silence I had given. And for the first time, I refused to pay any more. The night stretched long, and by morning, the neighbors would already be whispering. The next day dawned quiet, but Damon appeared at my door before noon, his face worn and sleepless. He looked younger somehow, like the boy I once cradled after nightmares, yet older, at the same time crushed beneath a weight he couldn't carry. I set a cup of coffee before him at the kitchen table. He wrapped his hands around it, but didn't drink. For a while, neither of us spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. She came back to me last night, he murmured. Clarice. She cried until her voice went raw. She begged me to believe her, said she only forged the loan because she wanted to protect me from looking inadequate, that she never meant to hurt me. And did you believe her? I asked softly. He pressed his lips together, his jaw tightening. I don't know. Part of me wants to. God help me, I still love her. I reached across the table, laying my hand over his. His skin was clammy, trembling with the storm inside him. Love doesn't excuse lies, Damon. Love without truth is poison. You've seen the receipts. You've seen how far she's gone. If you ignore it, she will drag you under. He pulled his hand back, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. You don't understand what it's like. When she looks at me, it's like I matter more than anyone else. She believes I can give her the life she wants, even if it's beyond me. She makes me feel worthy. My chest ached at his words. Worthy Damon. A woman who makes you feel worthy while stealing from you doesn't believe in you. She believes in what she can take. That isn't love, it's hunger. He stopped pacing, staring at the floor. If I walk away, I lose everything. My friends, the family she brought into my life, the plans we made, and I'll be the man who failed his fiancée. I rose my voice. Firmer. No. If you stay, you lose yourself. Clarice doesn't want a husband. Damon, she wants a sponsor. And you'll give until there's nothing left and she'll still want more. Choose truth or watch her destroy you. His eyes met mine, then wet with grief. You make it sound so simple. It isn't simple, I admitted. It's brutal. But it's the only way forward. Your father used to say that integrity is the only inheritance worth leaving behind. If you lose, that nothing else matters. Damon sank back into the chair, burying his face in his hands. I keep replaying the boutique in my head. The way she slapped you, the way she screamed when the card declined. I should have stopped her. I should have defended you. Instead, I stood there like a coward. I stepped closer, resting a hand on his shoulder. You don't need to defend me. Defend yourself. Find the courage to see her for who she is. For a long time he stayed still, shoulders hunched, silence heavy. Then he exhaled a ragged breath. I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I can let her go. I squeezed his shoulder gently. Then at least don't let her drag you into ruin. Because Damon, if you don't make the choice, she'll make it for you, and it will not be in your favor. His head lifted, his eyes hollow, yet searching, as if begging me for strength I couldn't give. I turned away, pouring myself another cup of coffee, because the truth was his burden, now not mine. And as the quiet stretched, the doorbell rang its chime, sharp, insistent, promising another storm. The doorbell's echo lingered in my ears even after I opened it to find Margaret, my sister, clutching a newspaper as if it were a weapon. She thrust it into my hands without a word. The headline screamed across the front page of the local section Society Wedding Crumbles Family Drama at Country Club. My eyes skimmed the article, my breath catching, as I read. Witnesses reported the bride's mother-in-law abruptly cut financial support, leaving the event in disarray. Guests arrived to empty tables and no staff, while tensions erupted among family members. The words stabbed not because they were false, but because they were only half the truth. There was no mention of the months I had paid in silence, no acknowledgement of the slap in the boutique, no hint of the forged loan. To the public, I was merely the bitter mother-in-law who had pulled the rug out from under a helpless bride. They'll gossip for weeks, Margaret muttered, lowering herself into a chair. Already the neighbors are whispering. Some say you embarrassed the family. Others say you saved yourself. I told them you had your reasons, but you know how people are. I folded the paper and set it aside, though its weight lingered in my chest. Shame pricked at me hot and heavy, but underneath it ran a quiet current of vindication. For the first time in years, the truth wasn't mine alone to bear. Even if the article painted me cruelly, even if the neighbors judged me harshly, at least the mask had slipped from Clarice's face. Later that afternoon, I went into town for groceries. Eyes followed me down every aisle. Some looked away quickly, pretending not to notice. Others leaned in close, murmuring to each other just loud enough for me to hear. That's her, the one who canceled the wedding. Imagine humiliating your own family like that. Or imagine funding it all and never being thanked. Each whisper cut, yet each also reminded me of something I had long forgotten. I was not invisible. For months I had been a ghost at my own expense, carrying a burden no one saw. Now at last they saw me, even if some chose to see a villain. At the checkout counter, Mrs. Langley, my neighbor of 20 years, leaned closer as she scanned my milk and bread. I read the paper, she said softly. Don't let it break you. People forget headlines, but they remember strength. And I've always known you to be strong. Her words were a balm I hadn't expected. I carried them with me all the way home. That evening, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching as dusk fell over the neighborhood. A pair of teenagers biked past, pointing at my house and laughing. A couple walked their dog, pausing just long enough to glance at my curtains before hurrying on. The whispers had grown legs, moving from phones to porches, from newspapers to nods in the street. I should have felt crushed beneath it all. And part of me did the part that had spent a lifetime keeping the family name untarnished. But another part, stronger now, knew the truth had finally shifted. Shame could no longer be laid solely at my feet. It belonged to Clarice and Damon too, and no gossip could erase that. As the sky darkened, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't family or vendors. It was Damon. His message was short, heavy with meaning. "We need to talk. Tonight." Damon's message lingered on my phone, but I let it sit unanswered until morning. I knew the conversation would come, but I also knew I needed a night of peace before facing another storm. When the sun rose, painting the sky a pale pink, I made a decision I hadn't dared make in decades. I would use my money for myself. It began simply. I stopped writing checks that weren't mine to cover. The automatic transfers to wedding vendors' subscriptions, even the small emergency payments I used to slip into Damon's account, I canceled them all. For the first time, my balance grew instead of shrinking. I enrolled in a painting class at the community center, a place I had passed for years but never stepped inside. On the first day, I sat before a blank canvas brush trembling in my hand and felt both foolish and free. The teacher, a patient man with silver hair, told me, "There's no wrong way to begin." So I painted roses, shaky and uneven, but roses nonetheless. At home, I dug out the gardening gloves I hadn't worn since my husband died. The backyard, once overrun with weeds, became my sanctuary. I planted roses in neat rows, their buds small but determined. Every morning, I tended them with the care I once reserved for other people's dreams. Watching them take root felt like watching myself grow again. Neighbors still whispered, but their words mattered less as my life filled with color. Mrs. Langley from the checkout counter stopped by with cuttings from her hydrangeas, telling me she admired my courage. Another neighbor offered to help me till the soil. Slowly, the stares turned to nods, then to smiles. With the savings I had preserved, I booked a short trip to New Mexico, a place my husband and I had once planned to visit, but never did. Walking through desert landscapes, the red earth beneath my shoes, I felt him with me, his promise, my promise, and the release of both. I sent Damon a postcard not out of obligation, but because I wanted him to know I was living. Each step forward reminded me how much I had lost of myself while trying to hold a family together with silence and sacrifice. For years, I had believed money was the glue that bound love, but it wasn't. Respect was the bond, and without it, all the dollars in the world only bought resentment. At night, I sat by the window, sketchbook in my lap, sipping tea and listening to the quiet hum of a house that was finally mine again. My husband's photo still watched from the mantel, and I spoke to him as I worked, telling him of the roses of the painting of the trip. Telling him I had finally kept my promise, though not in the way either of us imagined. Protecting Damon didn't mean funding lies. It meant standing strong enough to let him face the truth. I didn't know what future awaited my son, whether he would return to me whole or broken. But I knew this. I would no longer be the silent benefactor of other people's illusions. My life, my time, my money, they belonged to me now. One evening, as I knelt in the garden trimming rose stems, I heard footsteps on the porch. I looked up to see Damon standing there, his face weary, his hands empty. "Mother," he said softly, "I need to talk." Damon stood on my porch in the fading light, his figure heavy against the soft glow of the setting sun. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, eyes shadowed hair, unkempt, shoulders slumped. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of defeat. "She's gone," he said simply. I set down my pruning shears, brushing soil from my hands before motioning for him to sit. He lowered himself onto the wooden step beside me, elbows resting on his knees, staring at the roses I had planted. "Clarice packed her things this morning," he continued. "No note. Just gone. She blocked my calls. Her mother says she went to stay with an aunt out of state." I studied his profile, the boyish curve of his jaw still there beneath the hardened lines of adulthood. My heart ached, but I forced my voice to remain steady. "I'm sorry, Damon." He laughed bitterly, though there was no humor in it. "You warned me. You told me what she was, and I didn't want to see it. I kept thinking if I gave more, if I just kept the peace, she'd finally love me back the way I loved her." I reached over, resting my hand on his arm. "Love isn't something you buy with sacrifice. Respect is the seed of love. Without it, nothing grows." He swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on the roses swaying gently in the breeze. "She never respected me, did she? Not you. Not me. Not anyone who gave her what she wanted. Respect isn't in her nature, Damon. She only saw what could be taken." His shoulders trembled, and for a moment, I thought he might cry. But he clenched his jaw, holding it all inside. "I feel like a fool. Like I wasted years of my life on someone who never cared." "You're not a fool," I said softly. "You're a man who believed in love. That isn't weakness, it's hope. But now you know the difference between love that gives and love that consumes." The porch grew quiet. A bird called from the oak tree across the yard, the sound sharp against the hush of evening. Damon let out a long breath, his hands running over his face. "What do I do now?" he whispered. "You heal," I told him. "You stand tall, rebuild your life, and remember that love without respect is no love at all. You deserve better than what she offered." For the first time in weeks, his eyes met mine without shame. "Do you think I can rebuild? I mean," I squeezed his arm gently. "Yes, but only if you learn from this. Only if you stop letting others decide your worth." He nodded slowly, as though each word had to carve its way into him before he could accept it. The silence between us grew easier, then less heavy, like a burden shared. The roses stirred in the breeze, their petals catching the last of the light. Damon sat straighter, though his exhaustion still clung to him. "Thank you, Mother," he said quietly. We stayed there together until the sun dipped below the horizon, and when he finally rose to leave, I knew our story wasn't over. Because the next chapter of healing was just beginning. Spring arrived quietly, as if the world had conspired to give me peace. The air softened, the mornings stretched longer, and the earth itself seemed eager to bloom again. I spent most of those days near my window, preparing small pots filled with soil and hope. Each one cradled a rose cutting I had trimmed from the garden, tiny green stems that promised color if given patience. As I pressed each cutting into its new home, I thought of my life in the same terms. Rooted, severed, replanted. All the years of sacrifice, all the silence I had carried had left me weary, but not barren. Like these roses, I had begun again. The house no longer hummed with demands. No urgent calls from vendors, no relentless buzzing from relatives, no knocks at the door asking for just one more favor. It was my space now, quiet, unhurried, wholly mine. I tended the roses in the morning, painted at the community center in the afternoon, and took long walks by the river when the evenings turned golden. With every small act, I reclaimed pieces of myself I hadn't realized I had given away. Damon visited sometimes, usually in the evenings after work. His face still carried shadows, but he was healing slow and steady. He would sit on the porch with me sometimes, talking, sometimes just watching the sky fade into twilight. Once he told me he had closed the joint account Clarice had drained and started fresh. It feels strange, he admitted, but freeing too. I only smiled proud without needing to say so. Clarice never returned. Word drifted through the grapevine that she had found someone else willing to fund her illusions, but the details didn't matter. Her chapter in our lives was over. What remained was Damon chastened but stronger, and me learning that I could love him without rescuing him. Respect had to be chosen, not bought. One evening, as the kettle whistled, I carried a cup of tea to the windowsill, where the first rosebuds had begun to form. Their petals were shy, still curled, but they leaned toward the light, ready to open. I touched one gently, marveling at how something so delicate could grow from a stem cut down. In the stillness, I whispered words I had come to believe with every fiber of my being. Love may open doors, but only respect keeps them open. I sipped my tea, letting the warmth settle deep inside me, and watched the petals unfold slowly, deliberately, unafraid. These roses would bloom not for show, not for applause, but because they were rooted in care. And so would I. The world outside my door remained the same, a place of whispers, of judgments, of fleeting opinions. But I no longer lived for its approval. My door stood open only to those who entered with respect, and firmly closed to those who mistook kindness for weakness. As night fell and the roses faded into shadow, I drew the curtains and set my empty teacup aside. A new season had begun, not just in the garden, but in me, and this time, it was mine to keep. Outline.